Labor factoring in PataBid Quantify estimating. So we have labor factoring down here in the left-hand side under breakdowns. And in here, you can add in labor factors, you can tune labor factors, you can organize and control this in any way necessary for your estimate. So if I switch over to my general takeoff here, distribution, I am using electrical in this case. However, this works for fire sprinkler, for plumbing, any of those other trades in here. I can click on a 15 amp receptacle here and give it my specifications, and I'm just going to manually take off a couple of these here right now. And here we go. These go in and they have no factor assigned to them. If I wanted to be explicit and assign standard factor to this, for example, I can do that and I'll take off 3 more here. And here we go. Now these are in at the standard labor factor that I have defined here. If no labor factor is assigned, it is assumed to be 1 by default. And so with that, if these were a more difficult area or something of that nature, commonly used in lighting, for example, I can actually switch over to a lighting plan here. And let's say that these lights in this area were at a high bay, I could select my high bay factor here. And this is going to apply a 1.25 factor to the lighting here. So what this is going to do is effectively it's a 25% increase in the labor. So if I take off 3 of these here, for example, that's going to go in at the high bay labor factor. If I needed to adjust this, or if I forgot to add a factor to something in here, if I flip back over and I want to be explicit that these are part of standard, I can right click and select reassign and then select the factor that I want to assign to this. If I had to update multiple rows in here, I can grab multiple rows and reassign these, for example, to high bay 30 foot. I can adjust or add more in here. If I click on a new factor here, it adds a row in, and I can call this Duct Bank, for example, parallel runs, and I could put in a factor of, say, 0.9. This effectively means that I'm getting 90% of the labor here, or a 10% discount off of whatever labor book that I've selected for this project. And so this is how you can control and adjust your labor in a very fine-grained prescribed manner. Now, carrying forward into the summary screen, you'll see that the labor factor column shows up in here now. Now, this is going to be the average labor factor. So we took off the receptacle assemblies with several different labor factors, for example. And this is going to give me the average of those in here. If I wanted to break down by system or get more control over understanding exactly what's labor factored, where or how, we would break that out into some sort of breakdown, either system or location or something of that nature, while at the same time applying the labor factor to it. Going into closing here, when we go into labor factoring, now we have the slightly different way of handling things in here. So I'm going to assign the default crew to everything in here. We now have the labor factor in here, which is again the average labor factor for each of these breakdowns. And you'll notice in here, these are flagged as red. This is because they are exceptionally heavy overall average factors. And the system is just telling you, you should probably go and take another look at this. Maybe this is correct. Maybe there's a good reason for these to be at this level. It may also be a mistake. Something may have been added in a little too heavy. We can go back here And we can tweak this down to say, 1.15, something of that nature, and 1.1. And then if we go back into our labor here, the overall labor factors will have dropped. And so essentially, if it's plus or minus 10%, that's perfectly fine. Once you get into plus or minus between 10 and 20%, it's going to turn yellow as a suggestion to review this. Anything over that is going to turn red. Now you can go and adjust those labor factors as we just did there in the takeoff screen very quickly. You can also override this with the crew factor. So the crew factor works as it always has still. I can apply a another change here. So if this team is going to actually perform this really quickly, I could put a crew factor in of 0.9. And that is going to essentially work opposite to whatever the labor factoring is, while still maintaining complete clarity on what I have done factoring the labor on this project. And then I can override this again, go back to the defaults in here if necessary. So this is the labor factoring feature within PataBid Quantify and how you can use it to fine-tune the labor for different installation methodologies in your projects. Oh, one last thing to mention on this. This can be set up in your templates. So if you click on any one of your templates in here, you can pre-configure any of your labor factors in here.